Welcome to the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, where this week we will be surpassing 4,000 fighter profiles available for you to study from to ensure you leave no stone unturned for these upcoming MMA events. We cover 17 different promotions, and the Contender Series is just about a month away from kicking off, and that is where you will find it most useful to ensure you know who these fighters are contending for a UFC contract, and you can try to extract some value out of any of the betting that you hope to do for the Contender Series or any of these upcoming events. Just over the next 2 weeks, take this in. We got Cage Warriors 174, KSW 96, OKTAGON 59, A1 Combat 2022, UFC Vegas 94, Fury FC 94, Cage Warriors 175, A1 Combat 23, CFFC 133, UAE Warriors 51, UFC 304, Super Risen 3, and UAE Warriors 52. That's just the next 2 weekends. We have the entire schedule for the entire year already put up there, and we'll continue to add fights as they get announced. But make sure you check out the MMA Fight Archive. There's a reason we have over 85 signed up members as of right now, spanning from handicappers to analysts to predictors to commentators to fighters to coaches. You can try it out for free as well with a 7-day free trial. Check the link in the description below. That is the MMA Fight Archive. Check it out. All right. This week, we're going to be talking about UFC Vegas 94, which is probably one of the softest offerings that the UFC has had all year. It is headlined by a strawweight main event between Amanda Lemos and Verna Jandiroba. Also, we got Brad Tavares against Jun Park in the co-main event. There are some fun fights, and there's a lot of close fights here in terms of odds, so it will be interesting to see which fights we can actually extract some value from and try to capitalize on and hopefully scrape some profit off of this card, considering that there aren't too many chalky spots. So this is where we'll be able to see where the sharps are at and if they're able to actually get the right sides for this card. Let's do a quick recap of last weekend where we go 1-2 on Lock of the Night plays. Our Lock of the Night play in Christian Rodriguez ends up falling flat on its face. Sometimes the chin shows up, sometimes the chin does not. In the 3 prior fights for Julian Erosa, this man got hurt very badly, finished in 2 of them, managed to rally back in the 3rd one and get a win of his own. But Rodriguez landed his big shots, and it didn't seem to phase Erosa enough, and that eventually opened up that opportunity for Erosa to snatch up his patent guillotine and get the tap from Rodriguez, who normally showcases tremendous submission defense in terms of the submission game. And I was very surprised that Erosa was actually able to catch him in something like that. So we have to rip up our ticket of our Lock of the Night play there too. For PFL Mena, we had to rip up our Lock of the Night ticket there. LFA, I believe it was 188. We do get the unanimous decision victory for Eric Fimbres to go our way. So that now increases, or at least I guess slightly decreases, our Lock of the Night record to 52-24 on the year for a 68% hit rate. Again, we were on a pretty solid run here, and we're going to see if we can keep it going this weekend. Dog of the Night continues to shit the bed. Last week, I actually put out 3 candidates for you guys, and I didn't end up picking any of those 3, as Fatima Klein ended up closing as an underdog, which I was not expecting. I ended up going with her, and she got swept on the scorecards. It was clear that the grappling and size advantage of Jazz Dufiscus came into play there, and we saw Klein unable to keep up with it and fall short and end up suffering her first professional defeat. So that now drops our dog in the record to 23-53 on the year for a 30% hit rate. Absolutely atrocious. We'll see if we can get it back this weekend. Quick shout out to the people over there at GodzillaWins.com, providing your boy a platform to drop written breakdowns for the public. On Thursdays, we drop the main event breakdown, and then on Fridays, we drop the 3 best moneyline spots. If you want access to that, just go to GodzillaWins.com, and not just for the UFC coverage, but also all the other great writers and analysts that they have on there, helping you get some extra cash in your pocket with all the other sports that are available. All right. That's a wrap on the intros here. Actually, I quickly do want to plug, this week there's 3 regional events that I'll be covering. We got Cage Warriors 174, KSW 96, and Octagon 59, which all go down a Saturday morning. And since I actually missed the first week of July with the regional breakdown that I want to drop for you guys, the bonus episode that I normally do every month, I'll leave it up to you guys for this week. Which one do you want to see me break down? Cage Warriors, KSW, or Octagon? And I'll look to drop that a breakdown for you guys on Friday. The other two will be broken down strictly on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. So if you want access to that, check the link in the description below for that. Otherwise, like I said, I will pick one of those three to break down for you guys based on the comments that you drop in the comment section below. I'll be sure to put a post there as well to get the answer from you guys. But choose one of those three, and I will do a quick breakdown video for you guys to cover that event. That's a wrap on the intro, so let's get right into this 12-fight card, which starts off in the heavyweight division, where we got Muhammad Usman coming in at -130, going up against Thomas Petersen, who comes in at +110. Now, let's start on the Muhammad Usman side, who suffered his first UFC loss last time around, which snapped a 3-fight winning streak that he was on, and that came at the hands of Mick Parkin. Now, we saw Usman have some solid success in the first round, where he actually opened a cut on the eyebrow of Parkin with some of his striking, but in the second and third rounds, we saw a little bit more of an effective approach from Parkin, landing better strikes, landing better combinations, and looking to do a little bit more damage than what Usman was throwing in return. Now, Usman is a guy that is obviously the brother of former welterweight champion Kamaru Usman, but he doesn't usually fight the way that Kamaru does. This is a guy that likes to use a tepid style striking approach, where it's assuming that with his physique, he'd be a little bit more intimidating of a striker, but he's not that big of a knockout artist, at least not in this stage of his career. He does like to throw a lot of shots, and he doesn't he's not a super high volume, but he is a guy that likes to try to throw combinations out there and to stick with that striking game rather than looking to take his opponent's heads off. He will lean on the grappling every so often, but not as much as we've seen from his brother. And we've seen him actually help him win fights like his fight against Jake Collier, in a fight where he saw Jake Collier was really starting to slow down and that he could have the advantage in that realm should he take that. But that's not a realm that he normally looks to go to. He likes to stick to the striking and either win on the scorecards or, like he did against Zach Paunga, try to find a finish. Now, his opponent, Thomas Petersen, is coming off of his first UFC loss as well. Although it was in his UFC debut against Jamal Pogues last time, we saw him have no answer for the fact that Pogues was able to stop the takedowns from Petersen, a style that Petersen has been so successful with on the regional scene. We saw Petersen actually have a hiccup in terms of getting to the UFC when he fought for the LFA heavyweight title a couple years back, and that came to Waldo Cortez Acosta. That was a fight where we saw Petersen be very successful for about 2.5 rounds with his grapple-heavy approach, but his inability to put Waldo Cortez Acosta away allowed Cortez Acosta to muster up a finish of his own nearing the ending of the third round. Petersen was able to bounce back with 3 straight wins, and that ultimately led to his UFC debut. And that's where the better striking approach from Pogues ended up paying off. Pogues was able to bloody him up over the course of the first 2 rounds, and Petersen did muster up enough to at least win the third round, but by then it was too little too late. Now, I'm assuming we're going to see some solid improvements from Petersen, especially in the striking realm, knowing now that he can't always rely on the grappling, because fighters at this level will be able to stop that approach. Now he's going to have to figure out a way to mix it up a little bit better. The encouraging thing, even in that loss to Pogue, was the fact that he did not really give up. This was a guy that continued to put the pressure on and stay in his opponent's face. And even though he was getting bloodied up and touched up, he did not let that keep him away from trying to get off on his own offense, which led to 2 judges actually giving him that third round. Now, in this matchup, I don't think that Usman is as crisp and clean of a striker as Jamal Pogues is, which could allow Petersen to have a little bit more success here, especially with his wrestling as well. Usman has wrestling in his back pocket, but I don't think it's as good as what his brother normally brings to the table, and that will allow Petersen to put Usman through the grind and really start running away with this fight down the stretch. I think Usman will be successful with his striking early, but I think around that 6-minute mark, we'll really see the pressure and pace of Petersen start to catch up to Usman, which will allow Petersen to start dictating the pace of this fight, control this fight, and then go on to win this fight on the scorecards. I need need to see the improvements in play for Petersen, especially with the striking, before I can be confident enough in investing in him. But as a slight dog, I do think he actually ends up pulling off this the victory here and winning it by decision. All right, next up, flyweights going out of here as we have Luana Carolina coming in at -120, going up against Lucy Pudilova, who comes in at +100. For Luana Carolina, she's coming off of a TKO victory over Yulia Stoliarenko in a matchup where I looked to fade Carolina, as I thought that Stoliarenko's submission heavy approach would have allowed her to find a submission here against Carolina. And had there been 20 or 30 more seconds left in that first round, I think she would have been able to complete the armbar. But Carolina showcased a good submission defense and really start to take over in the second and third rounds, where she shut out Stoliarenko on the scorecards, but left the judges out of it by pounding her out in the dying seconds of the third round. Carolina is a fighter who has clearly improved since her first UFC matchup. And at her best, I think is a fighter that likes to utilize a striking heavy approach, utilizing her range and volume from distance, touching up her opponents and trying to beat them on the scorecards. Her opponent this weekend, Lucy Pudilova, is a fighter that had a very unfortunate initial run in the UFC where she went 2-5, and then she ended up getting cut, won a couple fights on the regional scene. I think she went 5-1 or 6-1 before being signed to the promotion again, and she picked up a big win over Yinan Wu in her return. Unfortunately, she got screwed on the scorecards in her following fight against Jocelyn Edwards, and then last round she got out-grappled by Eileen Perez through the first 2 rounds of their matchup. She did muster up a very strong third round, but unfortunately not enough to get a finish or a 10-8 round, which is why she ended up losing on the scorecards there. Pudilova was originally just a striker who liked to use her knees and elbows inside the clinch, and opponents were able to out-grapple her, which led to that unfortunate first cut from the UFC. But she's clearly improved that aspect of her game, and we saw it in play in the third round against Perez and even in her victory over against Yinan Wu. But I think it was really the strength and the aggressiveness of Eileen Perez that caused Pudilova issues in the first 2 rounds. I think in this matchup against Carolina, I think we'll see the aggressiveness of Pudilova pay off here. I don't think she'll allow Carolina to get comfortable at distance, and I also wouldn't be surprised if we see Pudilova try to mix in some takedowns behind her striking to keep Carolina on the mat. I think the difference between Pudilova and Stoliarenko is the fact that Stoliarenko is a much more threatening submission artist, but in terms of her takedowns and getting fights to the ground, she normally struggles, which is why we often see her pull guard and try to just pull off the submission off her back. Whereas Pudilova, I think we'll see her actually use her striking to set up her takedowns to catch Carolina off guard, which will ultimately allow Pudilova to grind her out from that top position. This is a very close fight as the odds indicate, but I do think that Pudilova is the better overall fighter, and optically speaking, I think she can make it look better for the judges. So give me Pudilova and Pudilova by decision. Next up, lightweights going at it here as we have Loic Radzhabov coming in at -110, and on the other side, we got Trey Ogden coming in at a pick-em price of -110 as well. We'll start off on the Radzhabov side, who was able to pick a third-round victory over Abdul Karim Al-Sawadi, and that was in a fight that was clearly 1-1 going into the third round, and it seemed like the momentum was on the Al-Sawadi side. But Radzhabov put some big power on Al-Sawadi and eventually finished him in the opening minute of the third round to get his hand raised and pick up his second UFC victory. This is a fighter that actually made it to the PFL finals twice, but fell short against Hausch Manfiel and Nathan Schulte, who were able to grind him out and start cruising in later rounds. That's been the unfortunate downfall of Radzhabov's career, is that he is very strong and powerful with his striking and wrestling early in fights, but we do see him start to fall off in terms of his effectiveness in the second and third rounds, which is where opponents are really are able to pull away from him. He's obviously training at Killcliff FC, has some good experience under his belt, obviously coming into his 24th professional MMA fight in this matchup, 33 years old, clearly a solid power striker, has some good wrestling as well, but it's really that cardio, and I feel like he's a guy that's usually going to come up short against guys that can game plan well and utilize high volume, high output to start to take over later on in matchups. He's going up a guy in Trey Ogden, who had a very unfortunate start to his UFC career by losing to Jordan Levitt, which is not a good look in my opinion, but since then he's put together a 2-1 and 1 no contest run, although that no contest likely should have been a victory for him, so he should probably be 3 and won over his last 4 matchups. Last time around, we saw him go up against Holobaugh and showcased a very disciplined game plan. He used a lot of movement and eventually started to change levels and land his takedowns. He landed 3 takedowns and controlled the fight for 11 minutes out of the 15 that was competed. But he did a great job in terms of establishing his top control, specifically from that half mount where he was able to get under control with his hooks, or at least his, the underhooks and overhooks, and that kept the forehead pressure on the chin and chest of Holobaugh, keeping him on the ground and ultimately allowing Ogden to, often posture up, land some big strikes, keep that fight in that position, and keep the BJJ black belt Kurt Holobaugh from pulling off any reversals, submissions, or even get ups off of his back. That just goes to show the kind of level of fight IQ and training and intelligence that Trey Ogden tries to put into his fights. This is a guy that is much better than the Jordan Levitt loss that we saw him start his career off with. Now, as a head coach and as a fighter that has a stable of fighters of his own, this is a guy that's really revolutionized his game. And even though he's 34 years old, this is a guy that can still go out there and have some quality wins. Is he going to find himself in title contention? Probably not. But this is a guy that if a stylistic clash is good enough for him, he should be able to come out on top. We saw Ignacio Bahamondes outstrike him, and that was a matchup where he just was unable to keep up with the striking advantage, the height, the reach, the movement of Ignacio. But in this matchup against Radzhabov, I think he could do something similar to what he did against Holobaugh. I think he can try to goat out some pocket exchanges from Radzhabov and then eventually change levels on him, look to take him to the ground. And Radzhabov will have some decent success in terms of stopping the takedowns early, but I think that Ogden will set up a good enough game plan here to keep Radzhabov working so that those takedowns will start to come easier in the second and third rounds. This is obviously very dangerous for Ogden early, as Radzhabov has that big power, and we've seen Ogden get hit a couple times, and it hasn't really looked the greatest, especially when Holobaugh was able to connect with him, so there is that concern. But in terms of an overall game plan and an ability to execute it and the cardio, I think that is in Ogden's favor here, and as a pick'em price tag, I do think that he can go out there and have a much better body of work and end up winning this fight on the scorecards, maybe even getting a third round finish if Radzhabov slows down that much. But official prediction will be Ogden and Ogden by decision. All right, next up, we got Miranda Maverick coming in at minus 220 going up against Deone Barbosa, who comes in at plus 185 in this flyweight matchup. Now, we'll start off on the Maverick side of things, who's on a 2-fight winning streak last time around, defeating Andrea Lee by decision in a matchup where her grappling was coming through every now and then, but it was really her striking that allowed her to touch up Andrea Lee and win that fight on the scorecards. Maverick is a fighter that largely relied on her physicality and her grappling earlier on in her career to get the win, but she's done a great job in terms of grinding opponents out, but also utilizing her striking, which is very much improved since stepping into the UFC back in late 2020, and that's allowing her to mix up her game very well. That keeps her opponents on the guessing side of things more often than not. Maverick is now 6-3 in her UFC career, 3 losses. That very controversial split decision loss to Macy Barber, then her loss to Erin Blanchfield, which is completely fine, and then her loss to Jazz Zavicius, who continues to showcase she's one of the top flyweights in the division. Maverick, those are very solid losses for a fighter at 27 years old to learn from and bounce back and become even a better fighter since then. And you see the other matchups, right? The Sabina Mazo, the Shanna Young, the Priscilla Cachoeira, the Andrea Lee wins. She's going out there and winning those fights pretty convincingly and showcasing that, there is real levels to this thing. She's going up against Deone Barbosa, who's on a 4-fight winning streak after she had dropped that loss to Jenna Bishop, who was able to grind her out and showcase that she was the better grappler pretty much overall. Barbosa is a BJJ black belt. She has a judo background as well, but this is a fighter, in my opinion, who's been benefiting from some decent matchmaking. Rain Guerrero, a decent fighter, but she's clearly outmatched in the grappling room and had very poor fight IQ in terms of taking Barbosa to the ground and trying to out-grapple her. And then Ernesta Kiriscate, that was a very weird matchup where Barbosa obviously had success in the first round with the grappling and her wrestling. Then in the second round, she she was unable to land the takedowns on Kruschewsky, but Kruschewsky started to mix it up on the ground with her a little bit too long, and that allowed Barbosa to pull off a reversal, eventually get the back of Kruschewsky and grind that fight out. That was around, in my opinion, that I thought we were starting to see Barbosa really start to slow down, and had she not gotten that reversal against Kruschewsky, or had Kruschewsky not mixed it up on the ground with her when she clearly could have forced Barbosa back to her feet, she could have done what she was able to do in the third round, and that was keep Barbosa in the striking realm and pretty much outstrike her and take advantage of the depleted gas tank of Barbosa. Barbosa's 32 years old. She, in my opinion, is a bit of a finished product, especially with the striking game that she brings to the table. She's not all that comfortable in that realm. She throws with some heat. She's had some good training and time to try to improve that realm of her game. But I think for her to have true success in her fights, she needs to get takedowns and she needs to get her jiu-jitsu going. And I think in this matchup against Maverick, I think the physicality of Maverick will end up being the difference maker here. I think Barbosa is slightly taller, if I'm not mistaken, but I do think it's going to be the strength of Maverick that will allow her to keep this fight where she wants to keep it. Barbosa could have some success with getting this fight to the ground early, but I think we've seen good enough submission defense and just a grappling defense overall from Maverick that's going to be very hard for Barbosa to pull off a submission here. I think we'll see Maverick make Barbosa work a lot through the first 5 to 6 minutes of this matchup, and then from there we'll see Maverick really start to pull away with this fight as she'll end up being the better striker, or at least a more effective striker. And even if she wants to mix it up on the ground, I think she can stay a lot safer than Ernesta Kruschewsky did, and that will allow Maverick to really land some big shots from on top. She's never been submitted. She's never been finished. This is a fight where it's pretty much in Maverick's favor, in my opinion, which is why she's one of the bigger favorites on this card. And even at minus 220, I think she is worth a shot and should be able to give Barbosa her first UFC loss. All right, next up, bantamweights going at it here as we have Brian Kelleher coming in at plus 160, going up against Cody Gibson, who comes in at minus 185. Now we'll start off on the Brian Kelleher side of things, who's on the second 3-fight losing streak of his professional career. Last time around, he got knocked out by Cody Garbrandt back in December, and that was a matchup that he was returning from a bit of a lengthy layoff after having to deal with a neck injury that seemed to be pretty severe, and that seemed to have affected the power that he's able to produce as he was landing some decent shots on Garbrandt, but it didn't seem to have any effect on him. It seems like the miles on Kelleher's body and the fact that he is not too far removed from his 38th birthday. His 30th birthday is actually next month, but also the fact that this is going to be his 40th professional fight. When you're at this low of a weight class and approaching your 38th birthday, things start to go a little bit haywire for most fighters. Kelleher is a guy that showcased a lot of different approaches in his fights. He has big power that he can put opponents away with, which I think is a little bit hindered at this stage of his career. He's been able to pull off that patented guillotine that he's been able to catch so many opponents with. He's also been able to out-wrestle opponents and put them through the grinder, which led to his last 2 professional wins against Domingo Pilarte and Kevin Kroom back in 2021. But we can cut him some slack for the 3-fight losing streak that he's on, as they did come to guys like Umar Nurmagomedov, Mario Bautista, and then Cody Garbrandt. But still, I do think he is on a clear decline in his career, and I think we could see that stamp this weekend should he not be able to get his hand raised. He's going up against a very experienced and tough Cody Gibson, who's on a 2-fight losing streak of his own, the first of which was an absolute war that he had against Brad Katona, which was the tough finale. But even though he ended up losing that matchup, the UFC was so impressed by that fight that they still decided to bring him back. He ended up getting swept on the scorecards by Miles Johns last time around, and that was a fight where he was unable to deal with the continuous lateral movement and the takedowns that Johns was landing, ultimately leaving Gibson on the defensive for the majority of that fight. Now, in this matchup specifically, Gibson is a guy that likes to rely on his slick boxing approach. He has a wrestling background that he can lean on if he needs to, but I really think it's going to be his 4-inch height advantage and his 7-inch reach advantage, which is going to come into play to keep Brian Kelleher at bay. This will allow Gibson to kind of dictate the pace of this fight. I think we'll see him utilize his long-range weapons with his boxing and his kicks, but I could also see him looking to take this fight to the ground to try to provide some resistance and keep Kelleher on his toes in terms of what's going to be coming back his way. Obviously, Gibson needs to be very wary of the submission, especially that guillotine choke from Kelleher, as the 4 fights that Gibson has lost by finish, 3 of them have come by guillotine, and that's definitely one of the more dangerous weapons that we've seen in Kelleher's skill set. But I think Gibson will be very privy to that. I think we'll see him more so lean on his striking rather than his grappling, and I think that will be enough for him to go out there and put together solid numbers and end up defeating Kelleher on the scorecards. Next up, very, very intriguing featherweight matchup here between Jung Lee coming in at minus 180. I think he's up to about minus 200 now, going up against Amil, who comes in at plus 155. Now, we'll start off on the Jung Lee side of things, who had a successful UFC debut last time around by having a very solid performance against Blake Builder. That was a fight where he showcased his improved takedown defense while landing damage, even while Builder was pushing him up against the cage and looking to try to get the fight to the ground. Jung Lee is a guy that likes to utilize his striking heavy approach, and that's what's led to his winning streak as of late, especially that win over Yi Jia that saw him earn that road to UFC victory. That was a matchup where he was coming in with a compromised knee, and even though he gave up some takedowns, he seemed to be the one landing the better damage, which ended up causing the fight to be scored in his favor. And that's what an advantage he's always going to have as he continues to improve his grappling defense and keep him fights in the striking range. He's going to continuously get off on his strikes. I have a little bit of a question mark in terms of his cardio, but the fact that he's been able to stop takedowns and stay in the striking realm allows him to just be comfortable throwing combinations, throwing kicks out the middle, and looking to land big damage. He does have a slick submission game as well that he can lean on, but I think at this stage of his career, he's more so leaning on the striking rather than the grappling, because that's what people or opponents have been looking to exploit to try to get the better of him. This is one of my top prospects in the UFC, and at only 28 years old, this is a guy that a lot of fighters should be keeping an eye on. His opponent this weekend, Amil, made a successful UFC debut against a short notice fighter coming up a weight class in Fernie Garcia, who he was able to 10-8 in the first round and then eventually finished in the second round after overwhelming him with pace, pressure, and damage. Amil, at 34 years old, is still considered a prospect considering he's only 9-0, and this will only be his second second UFC matchup. Amil is a protege of Gilbert Melendez, former Strikeforce lightweight champion. Amil, one of my favorite fighters to watch on the regional scene because of the pace and pressure that he puts on. He's always in his opponent's face. His striking mainly consists of a lot of kicks so that he can change up the looks on his opponent, switching stances, and eventually looking to engage them in the grappling realm. Once he gets his opponents to the ground, this guy does not lay in prey at all. He's often looking to advance to more dominant positions to try to find that TKO or submission wins. His cardio, very high level. And I know a lot of people are shitting on his Contender Series performance against Emrah Sanmaz, but that was a fight that was all action from the first bell. Both guys were grapple-heavy fighters, and they were looking to impose their will, but it was Amil that was able to stay a step or two ahead, ultimately winning that fight on the scorecards and earning his contract to the UFC. Amil needs to work on the striking a little bit, but the ability to push the pace, stay in his opponent's face, continuously pressure, and shoot endless amounts of takedowns will always keep them active or at least alive in most fights. To get a fighter that's willing to push the pace, eat some damage while continuously pushing opponents backwards at plus money like Amil, I think is worth a shot in this spot. Lee, like I said, will likely be the better striker, but I think the difference between what Blake Builder was unable to do and what Amil will be able to do is the fact that Blake Builder clearly breaks. Amil is not a guy that breaks. He'll take damage and he'll continuously stay in his opponent's face and look to continuously put them through the grinder. Yes, Lee should be able to stop the majority of takedowns early, but it's going to be the takedowns in rounds 2 and round 3 as Lee starts to break and as Lee starts noticing that Amil is not starting to break, even after all the damage that he's going to be able to land. So I see this fight closer to a 50-50 rather than as heavy of a favorite as we're seeing Jung Lee at around that minus 200 range at this point. And I think, it's worth a shot taking a guy on like Amil, who's going to continuously stay in his face, look to land some takedowns, look to get some damage from on top, and looking for that finish at all times. So I'm going to go Amil here, Amil by decision, maybe even take a pop on that third round prop if it's at a good enough number once it drops to the public. All right, got another Korean fighter here, probably one of the favorites, or at least fan favorites in Choi, who makes his return, coming in as a plus 140 dog. He goes up against Algeo, who comes in at minus 160 in this featherweight matchup. Start off on the Choi side of things, who has not gotten his hand raised since 2016. Now, to his defense, he has not been all that active as of late, as he did have his military duty that he needed to fulfill. And then he had some injuries that he had to take care of. It was early 2023 where we saw him have a solid first and third round, but unfortunately in that third round he landed a headbutt that caused the referee to deduct a point from him, and that ended up putting that fight against Kyle Nelson to a draw. And that could have been the best thing that happened for Kyle Nelson, as since that matchup, which if he had lost he probably would have gotten cut from, he's on a 3 or 4 fight winning streak ever since that matchup, finding new sense of confidence and looking to keep that roster spot, which he's done pretty well. But in this matchup, Choi, a guy that very slick striker. His striking defense needs a little bit of work. His takedown defense and grappling has been, just above average, allowing him to keep fights in the striking realm. But this is a guy that's, all entertainment pretty much every single time he steps in the cage. I don't think anybody will forget that war that he had against Cub Swanson back in 2016 or 2017, I believe it was, where it went to a decision, both guys landing big shots, but ultimately Cub Swanson coming out on top. But I think it did show the ceiling of Choi, who's just a little bit too hittable, especially against guys that can be productive and effective in the striking range. Choi, it's the inactivity that just rubs me the wrong way. It's so unfortunate not to see a guy who provides this much entertainment not be able to step into the cage more often, and we'll see if he can stay a little bit more active now after stepping in the cage this weekend. He's going up against the wild and unorthodox style of Algeo, who's coming off of a knockout loss to the aforementioned Kyle Nelson. That was a matchup where Algeo came in roughly as a minus 230 favorite, and seeing as the fact that he had never been finished by punches, it was very surprising to see Kyle Nelson be the one to hand him his first loss by KO. Algeo in that matchup got hurt very badly, but did a great job in terms of staying on his feet. Unfortunately, he was not intelligently defending himself, and Kyle Nelson was able to pretty much hit his head like ping pong and eventually get that finish with the referee stepping in to get that standing TKO. Algeo was obviously upset, but it's hard to be upset considering the type of damage he was eating and his inability to defend himself intelligently. Algeo is a guy that likes to use an unorthodox striking approach, a lot of weird footwork, strikes coming from weird angles, but the best part of his game is his ability to weaponize his cardio. He likes to keep a high pace, high pressure, not a lot of forward movement, but a lot of activity, a lot of strikes, making his opponent whiff at air, which usually taxes the gas tank of a lot of his opponents. And then from there, he looks to really start to pull away as he's able to turn up the volume, turn up the gas, and then ultimately start cruising in later rounds, just as we saw him do against Alexander Hernandez in his last professional victory. Now, going up against Choi here, this should be a very fun matchup, but I do think that the unorthodox striking approach of Algeo here will cause Choi some issues, and I think that could actually allow Algeo to land some big shots to potentially even hurt Choi badly, maybe even put him away. The under is a spot that I might be looking at if it's at plus money. I think that... it is at plus money, and this is a matchup that I can see, both guys trying to take advantage of the deteriorating durability of either side, although I do believe Choi is the one with the worst chin at this stage in his career. So I'm going to lean Algeo here. I think we see Algeo hurt Choi within the first 2 rounds and put him away. It's tough to bet against a guy like Choi, especially with Choi being an underdog, but his inactivity, the fact that he hasn't gotten a win in close to 8 years, everything's working against him here. Hopefully this is a feel-good story where he's able to come back and actually get a win, but I don't think that the MMA gods will allow that to happen. I think we'll actually see Algeo eventually get that TKO or club and sub opportunity. All right, next up, Cody Durden coming in at minus 120 in this flyweight matchup, welcoming back Bruno Silva, who comes in at plus 100. We'll start off on the Cody Durden side of things, who's coming off of a submission loss to Tagir Ulanbekov, which snapped the 4-fight winning streak of Cody Durden, who was really starting to gain some momentum since that loss that he suffered at the hands of Mohamed Wakhayev. That was a quick TKO loss, if I'm not mistaken, or guillotine. I can't remember which one it was, but it was a quick loss for Durden. But since then, TKO of JP Bays, decision victory over Carlos Mota, decision victory over Charles Johnson, decision victory over Jake Hadley. But it was really his aggressiveness and ability to apply his game plan that was making him so successful. We know wrestling is his forte, and in the striking realm, we see him bite down on his mouthpiece and accept the fact that he's going to have to trade in the pocket to get the respect of his opponents so that he can eventually change levels and get his takedowns going as well. But that's where we saw Tagir Ulanbekov take advantage of Durden. He hurt him on the feet in the first round and then eventually start to smother him in the second round with his grappling, opening up the back take and eventually sinking in the rear naked choke. Durden is a very game fighter. Very solid fighter that will always be very difficult to deal with for those top 20 to top 8 guys. It's the wrestling, it's the cardio, it's the pace, it's the ability to establish his style, even while putting himself in danger, that makes him so dangerous. His opponent this weekend, Bruno Silva, is on a 3-fight winning streak, but has not stepped foot in the cage. I believe it's been 15 months now, maybe 16 months since we've seen, or 16 months that we've seen him in action. Last time around, we saw him club and sub Tyson Nam, which was a very impressive performance from him. Bruno Silva is a BJJ black belt, but it's his slick boxing approach that allows the rest of his game to work so effectively. His loss against Tagir Ulanbekov, which is the last loss in his UFC career, was very impressive, actually. He put up a very valiant effort, and that was a matchup where I remember having Ulanbekov in a lot of parlays and was really biting my nails when the decision was read, as Silva did a great job in terms of keeping Ulanbekov from truly implementing his Dagestani wrestling pressure. And we saw Silva continuously work back to his feet, stop some takedowns, land some big strikes of his own, and even have some solid success with some grappling offense of his own. But ultimately, Ulanbekov was able to get the better of him that night. The issue with Silva, similar to Choi, although not as bad as Choi, is his ability to stay active. He just hasn't been getting a lot of action as of late. And like I said, this is going to be his first fight in 16 months. In this matchup, this is a very fun fight, which is why I understand the line being as close as it is. Obviously, Durden could kind of set the pace of this fight with his wrestling and biting down on his mouthpiece and landing some big shots. But Bruno Silva will be more than happy to meet him in the middle of the cage and land some big shots of his own. Although Durden will be able to land some takedowns here, I think we'll see Silva provide enough resistance, maybe even have some submission opportunities of his own, where he should be able to either hurt Durden, get a club and sub, or even catch Durden in a submission when Durden goes for a takedown. Silva's not going to give up top position without a fight. We'll see him continuously progressing to the cage, looking to work back to his feet, and then get off in his striking advantage, which I think will come into play pretty handily here. I'm going to call Bruno Silva club and sub, as I think that Durden will put himself into too much danger, and I think Silva is dangerous enough to eventually find that big shot and put Durden away. Again, either straight up TKO or straight up club and sub. I'm going to go submission as my official prediction here, and I do like Silva as a slight dog at plus 100. All right, lightweights going out of here. Kurt Holobaugh coming in at plus 115, going up against Kenan Kruschewsky coming in at minus 135. Starting off on the Kurt Holobaugh side of things, he's coming off of a decision loss to Trey Ogden in a matchup where he was unable to deal with the grapple-heavy approach of Ogden. Now, I think Ogden set up a perfect game plan to try to take advantage of the weaknesses in Holobaugh's game, and even though Holobaugh has been able to pull off submissions off of his back, just as we saw against Austin Hubbard, or an ability to pull off reversals and get-ups because of his BJJ black belt, Ogden did a great job in terms of establishing that half guard and putting enough resistance from that top pressure to cause Holobaugh issues in terms of working back to his feet. But Holobaugh is a guy that loves to provide aggression, pressure, and just staying in his opponent's face and throwing big shots. His lack of speed has kind of gotten him caught in the past, but he has solid durability, which allows him to eat some shots in the pocket so he can throw big shots in return of his own. He has solid cardio. He has an aggressive BJJ game if he is able to at least retain guard, but it's really his ability to just keep moving forward and landing big shots on his opponents that cause those guys a lot of problems. His opponent this week in Kenan Kruschewsky earned his contract on the Contender Series back in 2023 by submitting Dylan Mantello in a very impressive fashion. He quickly got back on the horse by accepting a short notice matchup against Elvis Brenner in November, and he got put flat out cold in the first round. Kruschewsky was a guy, when I was researching him for the Contender Series, that I believed was the most UFC-ready fighter that we've seen on the Contender Series in a while. He has slick combination striking. He has a BJJ black belt if he needs to lean on it. He has 5-round experience, so his cardio should not be that bad either. But I wonder the stability of his chin after seeing how badly he got knocked out by Elvis Brenner back in November. He's taken off the right amount of time, in my opinion. If his chin is up to snuff, he's usually a very difficult opponent to deal with because of the combination striking style that he likes to implement. If he feels he has a grappling advantage over his opponents, he'll look to take them to the ground and utilize his BJJ. But this is a guy that usually brings the pain. He has a lot of finishes on his record. He has been finished himself, so that's a little bit of a question mark. I think if the total is set at 2.5 here, that might be the way to go. This is a very volatile fight, but I do have to actually lean with the aggression of the older Kurt Holobaugh. I think that he can goat Kruschewsky into a pocket exchange, and that could potentially cause Kruschewsky a lot of problems. We've seen the type of power and pressure that Holobaugh has been able to apply in the past, and that could pay off for him in this matchup against a guy that's coming off a pretty bad knockout loss himself. I lean Holobaugh here. I think that we'll see him force Kruschewsky into a pocket exchange, and that's going to allow Holobaugh to land a big shot and put him out cold. At plus 115, not a bad way to take a shot on somebody that is as aggressive and powerful as Holobaugh. All right, talking about powerful, we're going to talk about Steve Garcia coming in at minus 140 in this featherweight matchup against Seungwoo Choi, who comes in at plus 120. Now, starting on the Garcia side of things, who's on a 3-fight winning streak with all 3 of those wins coming by knockout. We've seen Garcia do a great job in terms of surviving the early onslaught of his opponents, only to eventually start walking them down and landing big strikes of his own. We saw him do it against Shailan Nerdembeko, who had solid success in the first round and eventually got finished with a body shot in the second. And then Melquizael Costa, who was keeping Garcia defensive in the first round up against the cage. And then eventually in the second round, we saw Garcia land that big shot to put Costa clean out. Garcia is a guy that relies heavily on that knockout power of his and his ability to stay safe enough in the defensive grappling game whenever opponents are looking to take him there, which most opponents look to. And then from there, he just eventually gets that big shot off and gets his opponents out of there. That's what he leans on a lot. Power, explosiveness, speed, and then defense, obviously, to stay safe early. His opponent this weekend, Seungwoo Choi, is coming off of a decision victory over Jarno and Aarons, where he utilized a full mixed martial arts approach. Normally, we see Choi look to utilize a striking heavy approach with his combinations and power from range, but we saw against Aarons, he was able to mix it up in the grappling realm and have success of his own. That win allowed him to snap a 3-fight losing streak that he was on, that he suffered at the hands of Alex Caceres, Joshua Culibao, and then a knockout loss to Mike Trezano. Opponents have looked to take Choi into the grappling realm to exploit him there, but the improvements that we saw in the Aarons fight is a encouraging sight to see for this fighter in Choi, who I think is kind of underachieved throughout his UFC career. Now, this is a matchup between 2 guys who will likely look to go out there and strike with each other. I think Choi might look to initiate the grappling, but for the most part, we'll see good enough defense from Garcia that he'll go down a striking battle here. And then it comes down to, do you side with the power and aggression that you see from the Garcia side, or do you side with the technical advantages that we'll see from the Choi side? You're getting a solid plus 120 line on Choi to showcase that striking advantage, especially technically speaking, but I do still find myself leaning on the Garcia side with that knockout power that he provides. Normally, I like fading guys that just strictly rely on that knockout power, but I do think that Choi will eventually find himself in trouble here and eventually find himself staring up at the lights. I lean Garcia, but not so much the minus 140. I think you can find his KO line roughly around plus 130, plus 120. I don't know if I'll eventually end up pulling the trigger on that, but I do think that we'll see Garcia end up landing that big shot and finding the knockout. I would rather Garcia by knockout rather than Garcia money line at minus 140. All right, co-main event time. We got Brad Tavares coming in at plus 140 in the middleweight division, going up against Jung Yoon Park coming in at minus 160. Now, Brad Tavares is now 1-3 over his last 4 fights. Last time around, getting knocked out by Gregory Rodriguez. That was a matchup where it seemed like his volume style of striking was not really paying off for him because of the big power that Rodriguez was landing in return. We saw obviously a very good game plan from Tavares, as he did a great job in terms of utilizing a leg kick against Chris Weidman and then winning that fight on the scorecards, never really pushing the pressure too much to try to get himself out of position. The 3 losses that he has suffered in these 4 fights have come at the hands of power punchers. Du Plessis was able to hurt him very badly throughout their 15 minutes. Obviously, Bruno Silva was able to put him away in a, in my opinion, a early stoppage of sorts. And then the Gregory Rodriguez, just the power that he was landing with, caused Tavares a lot of problems. Tavares is 36 years old, has a plethora of UFC experience. He's been with the company for over 14 years now. We know what he's normally good at, and that's providing a volume-heavy striking approach and showcasing good enough takedown defense, which has allowed him to really keep opponents in the striking realm. But again, it's his lack of knockout power that has allowed opponents to kind of just bite down on the mouthpiece a little bit harder than him and throw with even heavier heat in return. His opponent, Jun Young Park, has been one of my favorite middleweight prospects in a long time. He had that solid 4-fight winning streak, halted last time around by Andre Muniz in a fight that I thought that Park actually deserved to win. It was Muniz who was diving for legs and looking to initiate the grappling realm for his life, while Park was the one, even in his defensive positions, landing more damage. And in my opinion, I thought he won rounds 1 and 3 pretty clearly with the damage that he was able to implement. Park is a guy that likes to use an aggressive style, forward movement, and mixes in his grappling every so often to try to break his opponents so that he can eventually find that submission, just as he did in his last 3 professional wins. But this is a guy who I think needs to have that ability to break his opponents, have that cardio edge that he showcased in prior fights as well, for him to eventually get his hand raised. In this matchup against Brad Tavares, it's a closer fight than the odds indicate, in my opinion. I think Tavares is the slicker striker of the two, and I think his takedown defense will allow him to keep this fight up long enough that he can eventually start picking apart Jun Young Park, landing the more damaging blows, and eventually winning a classic Brad Tavares type decision. I think Park's going to really have to turn up the volume late if he hopes to have success, but Tavares is a guy that's never really showcased much cardio issues. It's been the guys that have had big power shots to cause Tavares issues as of late, and I don't think that Park is a big power puncher. Park is an aggressive striker, but he doesn't provide that one-punch knockout power or that aggressive power striking that we've seen from guys like Rodriguez, Bruno Silva, and Dricus du Plessis, which leads me to believe that stylistically speaking, this is a very winnable fight for Tavares as long as he can keep it in the striking realm, which I believe is 80+% takedown defense rate will allow him to do against Park, who normally gets those takedowns against guys that, are not as good as takedown defense artists as Brad Tavares is. So I'm going to lean Tavares here, Tavares by decision, and I don't think he's a bad underdog spot at +140. All right, main event here, strawweight division, former title challenger Amanda Lemos coming in at +110, going up against Virna Jandiroba, who comes in at -130. Now, I'll start off on the Amanda Lemos side, who's coming off of that decision victory over Mackenzie Dern, where she showcased solid submission defense, even while finding herself in very bad spots throughout the 15 minutes that they were fighting. She had a very solid second round where she hurt Mackenzie Dern very badly, but instead of looking to get Dern back up to her feet, she mixed it up on the ground a little bit too long and allowed Dern to recover. But Dern still managed to find some pretty dominant positions, and we saw that great submission defense from Lemos to keep her in that fight. We know what Lemos is all about. She likes to provide big power, look to knock her opponents out, and stay on the gas in terms of at least staying in her opponent's face and putting big power on them. But she has shown cardio issues in the past, which is where opponents are able to take advantage of that, start dictating the pace themselves, but they still have to worry about the big power coming back their way, as Lemos is always capable of landing that power and putting her opponents out. It's one of the crazier power punchers that we've seen in the women's strawweight division in a long time. 37 years old, it's clear that she's starting to slow down. And it's clear the major issue in her game is the fact that she has questionable takedown defense. And let's be honest, if it was a 5-round fight against Mackenzie Dern, the momentum was clearly in Dern's favor. And that's a fight that probably could have gone Dern's way had that fight gone 5 rounds, just as we saw against Weili Zhang, who utilized a grapple-heavy approach as well. Lemos is very dangerous early in fights, that's without a doubt. But if opponents can really put that grind on her early, they can pull away in deep water and start having success in the second, third, fourth, and fifth rounds, which she'll eventually have to face in this matchup against Verna Jandiroba, as this is a 5-round main event matchup. Now, Jandiroba, 3-fight winning streak, pulled off a solid upset victory last time around against Lupito Godinez, who I thought was a very solid spot against Jandiroba, but I overlooked Godinez's ability to stop the grind from Jandiroba, who did a great job in terms of initiating the clinch, getting the back of Godinez, and keeping her in compromising positions. Now, Jandiroba's striking game leaves a lot to be desired, but she stays active enough that she can eventually change levels, and she often changes levels in open cage where she's able to engage on that single leg or at least get around the hips of her opponents, and she doesn't look to complete the takedowns in open cage. It's more so looking to initiate that clinch so that she can push her opponents against the cage to eventually start working for the takedowns. She has great trips, throws. She utilizes her leg reaps very well. She's very good in terms of utilizing the forward-backward movement to eventually throw her opponents off balance so that she can complete takedowns. And she's really good in terms of taking the back of her opponents and securing that position as well. I think we'll see Lemos have some success early, but I think as Jandiroba's chin holds up, which you've seen do it pretty well, I don't think she's been finished ever throughout her career. She will be able to apply that pressure and that pace here to Lemos, specifically with the grappling, and I think that will open up a submission opportunity for her probably in the third or fourth round where Lemos really starts to slow down. Jandiroba's smothering grappling approach is very difficult to deal with for a lot of opponents, and Lemos is going to learn that firsthand here. Yes, Lemos has that ability to finish this fight early, but if she's unable to, I think Jandiroba will be able to get into that rinse-repeat game plan, getting that grappling going, and eventually opening up a submission opportunity for herself to get the dub here. I'm going to say Jandiroba by submission. There you guys go. Breakdowns on all 12 fights for this UFC Vegas 94 card. A little bit of a late drop this week. Just was unable to get into the groove of getting into my effective studying mode. Finally got into it. Finally got it done with. I'll also have the top 3 lock of the night and dog of the night candidates dropping over the next 24 hours. So make sure you guys stay tuned for that. Otherwise, regularly scheduling programming should be commencing shortly. And reminder, let me know which regional show you'd like me to break down. Cage Warriors, OKTAGON, or KSW, and I'll drop that for you guys on Friday. All right. Appreciate the patience. Appreciate the love. Appreciate the support. I'll see you guys again later. Peace.
Last thing.